Well, it is an old cliche that a picture tells 1,000 words, and a picture, quite a vivid one, is being painted by this space around me today. This is the site, this is the booth that was to be the SolarWorld AG booth here at Intersolar 2017 in Munich. Of course, SolarWorld's bankruptcy only took place a few weeks ago, and SolarWorld had spearheaded the trade dispute against Chinese manufacturers, both in Europe and in the Americas. GTM Research is just published some findings and some research that they've taken into trade disputes and the effects it's having on global solar markets. Benjamin Attia papered this research and wrote this paper. And Benjamin, what are you finding about the impacts? How are trade disputes affecting the solar industry today?
Sure, yeah. So the biggest finding we found is that over 40% of all of global demand that we forecasted for 2017 is actually impacted in some way by a form of trade protectionism, either a subsidy for domestic content or some form of import duty or tariff on trade.
And the reason for these kind of trade measures, whether it's in incentive form or in a duty or an anti-dumping duty or anti-circumvention, or there's all various manifestations, is to support local manufacturing. How effective are these policies in doing that?
We've actually found that in almost every situation, at least to date, that they've been almost entirely ineffective. So in Europe, we've seen actually a closure of domestic manufacturing for the most part. Imports from China actually shifted to becoming imports from Southeast Asia. And in the United States, we've seen obviously a collapse of domestic manufacturing as well that the Suniva and SolarWorld Americas case doesn't seem to be rectifying. We do see some instances in Turkey, perhaps, with the recently successful Konya auction for 1 gigawatt, including very, very stringent domestic content requirements that could actually spur the sort of creation of a domestic industry, though we do have our doubts that that'll happen, at least in a timely way.
Well, and surely these kind of duties or measures may affect deployment, the actual installation of solar parks or rooftop installations. What kind of impacts are you seeing there?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're seeing very much is that these deadlines, right? So for instance, if the Suniva case were to go through, it'll happen in 150 days. The ITC will make remedies to President Trump. He has up to 150 more days to actually determine those remedies or accept, reject, or modify them. So at most, we have 300 days or just about 10 months or whatever it is in order to import before any of these effects or any of these things could take effect. So there's actually installation rushes in the United States right now. Just last week we saw module spot prices in the United States go up 10% a week over week average. And we're seeing the same thing in India with the goods and services tax, and that's sort of eliminating the zero import duty preference that Indian solar had up until this time.
Wow, so it can actually increase market volatility as well, and that's something that has kind of plagued the industry for many years. For manufacturers, though, it does impact the way they do business, and some of the large Chinese manufacturers that are around us actually still in the booth, still in this hall in Munich, they actually employed strategies of putting manufacturing outside of China. How effective were these policies for these companies?
Very effective, yeah. I mean, they essentially didn't suffer too much capacity loss, actually built out something like 600 megawatts of new fabs in Southeast Asia in the last 2 years. And that's something that's allowed them to continue to import into Europe. We'll probably have some impacts on the Suniva case depending on what these remedies are, which of course may be a little bit hard to predict at this point.
Well, you mentioned the Suniva case, and of course SolarWorld Americas has joined this case, very recently launched. What kind of impacts do you think that will have on the US marketplace?
Again, a little early to tell. We're right in the midst of doing a bunch of scenario analysis right now to try to maybe forecast or predict what types of remedies we could see. Of course, so Suniva's recommendations have gone to the ITC. Of course, those are pretty ridiculous, but if we start with those at 78 cents a watt for modules and 40 cents for cells, that actually brings us back to 2012 module pricing in the United States and 2015 system pricing. And that brings us from 36 states of grid parity in 2018 down to 27. So that's pretty significant for starters. That doesn't necessarily mean that will happen, though. In the ITC's case, right now they've got 150 days minus a week or so to actually review and recommend tariffs to President Trump, or some sort of remedy, whether it's tariffs or whatever it might be. So those remedies actually go to President Trump, but he has very broad or wide leeway in determining what those impacts are. So we have not really been able to determine, nobody really would be able to know until it hits his desk and until we have a determination what those remedies could be. But we do expect that will cause installation rushes in the meantime, importation rushes in the meantime, while we still don't have any remedies in place. And it could mean the threatening of forward module pricing assumptions on utility scale solar projects in the United States. That's an 11 gigawatt pipeline right now, and it's only going to grow. So that's a pretty significant impact. It could have ripple effects through the global supply demand balance, since the United States is the second largest market in the world. And we could see changes in terms of oversupply persisting beyond the end of 2018 or early 2019, as we're expecting right now.
Wow, so it could be back to the future in terms of pricing, which surely isn't a good thing. Of course, in the past, Solar World has had one of the most prominent booths here at Intersolar Europe, no longer this year. Benjamin Attia, thanks very much for your time from the 2017 Intersolar Munich. I'm Jonathan Gifford, the editor-in-chief of PV Magazine.